this being critical thing, everybody thinks it's really difficult. Everybody thinks, how do you be critical? What's the thing? And I think I have been able to kind of package up in a way it's easy to understand what makes it critical and how you actually do it. We can all be critical. Some people are naturally very critical, and they might not realize it. It might be the people that are critical in their life, but they do that because anybody that does it there's certain circumstances that allows us to be critical. And I want to show you an example of one of those. Then we'll look at that. And then we'll look at the ethics. But we're talking about media ethics in this. As soon as I seen this picture, for me, this sums up being critical. But it's an example of the essence. And it lays out, when you look at this and you examine why this guy's jabbing his finger at somebody, I kind of make up, I don't know what he's obviously upset. He's being critical about something in a negative way. You can explain everything you need to know about this from this one photograph. So in my mind, the example I use is he is being critical of his goalkeeper. So he's basically, it wouldn't be me that would use this language, but he's saying, you're shit, we should get rid of you, okay? Now, it turns out his criticism is valid, but I want to explain how he's come about it, and that unpacking that is the key. So he knows, I'm taking it he's an ardent football supporter, so he knows football. He knows a bit about it. He's not going for the pies. He's actually watching the football. He understands goalkeeping and good goalkeeping standards. So he knows that. That's him. He knows that. Knows it fairly well. So his concept of good goalkeeping, or he understands what the role of a goalkeeper. So the role of a goalkeeper is to move about the box and stop the ball from going in the net. That's what he's supposed to do. And sometimes this will involve very acrobatic movements on behalf of the keeper to keep the ball out. And he knows that good goalkeepers will do this. Goalkeepers will back up their defence and be the final thing that stops the ball going in the net. That's what they do. He also knows that good goalkeepers are athletic. They can pull off very moves that will stop the ball from going in the net. He also knows that a high standard of goalkeeping, a goalkeeper may go several matches without ever letting in a goal. So there could be 4 or 5 games and this goalkeeper's not letting a goal. That's a real high standard of goalkeeping. Okay, so this is what he knows. So he's pointing at his goalkeeper and saying, you're shit because in this match, you've let the ball go in the net 3 times and it's not half time. The match is not halfway through and you are showing nothing of the high standards of goalkeeping I'm aware. So I'm using the standards I'm aware of to evaluate your performance and say it's rubbish. And that is it. That's being critical, absolutely in a nutshell. So if we look at this and we just take this and you apply it to literally just about anything that you're asked to evaluate in academia, in your subject, doesn't matter the module, doesn't matter whatever. This is a constant thing we're looking for in evaluation. And over the years, I've realized that this is by far the most common way that we evaluate or we be critical. So we look at what it should be. And this is used to evaluate what it is, which is the practical or actual way it is. So what it should be, this is often expressed as a theory, a model, or a concept. And we'll go into that when we get to your example. What it is, so to say what it is, you will look at the theory, model, or concept, and that gives you what it should be. These are the things. If something's working well, it should be this, it should have these things, it should do this. And then you look at the actual thing you want to evaluate, and you look for the evidence of what is actually happening, and then you can compare it. You can compare the two, and either it measures up or it falls below. It either comes up and it's very good, or it falls below and shit. Sorry if you keep using that word. So if you I don't know if you've been aware of this before, but I think I've done this in most classes, that if you were to ask people how well the NHS did in the pandemic, most people would give that a high score. They would say, if you just kind of, not based on anything, but you kind of said, kind of from what, not based on what you know and understand from the news, from what you're aware of, what score would you give them? People give them a 7, an 8, a 6, a 9, a fairly high number, because they've done the best they could and they've done well. And, Then if I asked you something like, if you were to talk about Donald Trump as a president, what score out of 10 would you give him? Most folk would say like 2, 3, 1, nothing, because they feel, there may be people give it more, but generally, based on what they think, a lot of people will give him a low mark because they don't think he's done that well. That's the way it seems to be. In America, it's more 50-50, but I think a lot of people outside of it, it's been a bit of a, anyway, so they give low scores. And that kind of indicates, so if you look at the subject and you start to do your reading on it, etc., it may come across to you that the thing you're evaluating, in this case, is ethical or it's not ethical. They're handling that ethical situation because that's starting to show or it's not starting to show. So for me, it's a mix of ethical theory that sets you up to answer this question, and then it's the ethical practice and it's getting examples. So in this one, the examples you're going to find are all going to be the positive ones. You're all going to see, well, it could be a mix. It could be a mix, to be honest with you. But the first thing is the comparison comes from you kind of taking from, but the first thing you're going to have to lay out is, what is it that makes good PR practice? And hopefully when you're reading about that, they will flag up the relevant theories, which you can then describe and discuss as well. So, if you get but it's, for me, it's on that side of it, it's going to be the theory, the ethical theory that's applied to this. If you kind of know, if it's virtue ethics, then you have to say virtue ethics is this is what it is, first of all. So what it is, but then the next thing you're going to say, these are the features that, if you're doing this and this and this and this, and obviously transparency is in there. So if you are transparent and you are honest, but also you do the message and you do this and you do that, these are the things that make kind of good PR, and also what make good ethical PR. And I think there's a kind of a difference between good PR, good as in, I don't know, if you're not ethical, you can work PR in a way which does more than just, and it is a balance. Do you know what I mean? Because you could argue that no company's all bad and no company's all good. But obviously PR is perhaps going to emphasize the good things and diminish or look less the bad things, but they should still talk about the bad things. But if you're really unscrupulous, you might ignore stuff, and you just might, well, you omit the truth. That's another thing they talk about. Well, you just omit things that put a negative slant on it. But at what point does that become? So when you work out what it's involved in good ethical PR, you then say that you would look at examples and say, this is good PR because it has. So this is definitely going to be about examples. All of this side of what you're comparing it with would be various situations, I think, where you could use an example like Volkswagen, or you could use an example like Nike, or you could use an example like, so for Volkswagen it was Dieselgate. For Nike, it might be the way they handled the taking the knee thing and the side they took in that. But it might be their, Nike sweatshops and stuff. There's plenty of examples or Coca-Cola. There's plenty of big corporations really have aspects of them which are very dark and very despairing. And you can bring up how the companies have done this well. And you can say, here's an example of ethical PR where, and then you show how, so then you'll say, here's a practice I found, right, in this company and as an example. And I can tell you how it's got certain aspects. So say there are 3 things to do with that make virtue ethics. You can say this PR practice, when it came to the 3 things that ethics has, so it says ethics has these things too, and if you have them to a high degree, this is like the more it should be to that standard. 4, the first thing should have that sort of strength. So if you can take, for number 1, we've got some of it. We've got 2 parts. We've not got everything, but we've got 2 parts. For 2, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 things, and for 3, we've got 1 thing. So out of the possible 4 aspects of each one, you've got a limited amount. Now, if you fully endorsed that, there would be 12 things that you could show. I'm saying roughly. Okay. But when we actually look at it, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things that you can find evidence for. So that's basically 7 out of 12. But that's still not bad. Whereas you could have a policy that has everything, in which you would give it a 12 out of 12, or you could have a policy that was so unethical that it had very little to show for it. So this is very much a kind of loose concept in my part, but for me, there are things in virtue ethics or ethics in general, or within the standards of what makes good PR, that you will constantly be referring to, saying, this is what anybody should be aspiring to. And here's examples of people using it, like this company and this company, like, like there'll be kind of like, if a company's ethical, then their PR is going to be pretty ethical too, because they've got nothing to hide. But they are very much talking about the dilemma of how do you strike that balance of trying to do your job but not being dishonest or unethical about it. Okay, so that's very much, the first half is kind of setting up everything that you're going to be looking for in it, and then the second half is you unpacking things that say, here it's here, this is so. And then of course, during all of that, because the question says, how do you strike that balance, you will continually say something that if you do this a lot, or you do it to a certain degree, you are going to damage the company because you're being too honest. Whereas if you do this and this, you are not damaging the company, but you're really becoming unethical. There's something else I'll mention to you, and I guess you can use this or not, but it's a useful way to really understand it. In a situation like this, you have 2 things pulling in different directions. And for me, it's called, it creates a tension. So one side you've got pulling, being ethical, doing the right thing is pulling you in one direction. And making the company look as good as possible is pulling in the other direction. And as soon as you go one way or the other one suffers. And that's a really good way of thinking about it, which then says that it's a continuum between being ethical and making the company look good. Where can you sit and still be kind of like sleep at night and feel good about it? And if you express it in that way and say that, keep it in mind that, you might say doing this or doing that or doing this, or these examples are tending to be, they're good for the company, but they're tending to move away from being ethical. And these things are tending to be more ethical, but that's a good way to express the things that you find. So you find things and you say, this does this and this does this. So how do I express it that answers the question? And if you have phrases like this would be done this would be done for the company rather than to be ethical, and this would be done to be ethical rather than for the company, then that's tying in with that, striking the balance. This is all kind of general, generic stuff, but if I can apply it to, I will try and apply it to this. But in fact, I probably will apply it. Right, so criticism could be positive and negative, but it's usually a mix. And for me, that exactly talks to the fact that it's very difficult to get. It's not a good and bad thing that's happening here. It's two different things in tension. One's pulling one way, one's pulling the other. So you're trying to get it in the middle. So that's what gives you the positive and negative. So you can say this kind of thing and that kind of thing is positive. You can do these things and be positive and be ethical, which is a positive thing. And anytime you talk about any action, it's actually going to be positive and negative in the same instance. So it's up. So what you talk is going to be a mix. Now it's going to be positive and negative in the same instance, because if you do something that's positive for the ethical side, it's going to damage the business. And if you do something that's positive for the business, it detracts from the ethics. So the positive and negative, which should be in criticism, is inherent. It's built in. So kind of play it that way. It's a mix. It's very much a built-in mix. Right. So if you're thinking about being critical, theatre critics and movie critics are a really obvious option. And again, that explains the mix of things, because people who review restaurants, who review movies, who review theatre, they have that real understanding of the subject, which allows them to critique in real detail. So I don't know if you know Mark Kermode, the guy with the glasses on the BBC who does all the movie reviews. He's brilliant because he knows so much about. And he'll always balance what he says, but it'll be very complex what he says. And that's kind of what you're aiming for. As many little things as you can read up in a journal article that talks about ethics. Because once you've got the basic setup about theory of PR, which is kind of going to come from textbooks. This is what PR is. This is the ethics of PR. This is the building blocks and what we have. This is the kind of theory. This is the kind of ethical theory that's here and is tended to be applied. Then you'll go to journal articles, because journal articles have said, we've looked at PR ethics in this situation, and we've looked at PR ethics in this, and we've looked at PR ethics here. And they'll all tell you little bits and pieces that you can bring in and say, well, this journal talked about this and how this is really bad, or this is really good, and this works. And here's another one, and this has an example, and they looked at it there. That's going to build that up. So the more journal articles you can find that are relevant, there's a good many of them are going to have something valid that you can pull out and put in and say. And that doesn't, and again, to go back to the reading, that doesn't mean you've got to read the whole thing cover to cover. But if you can get in and look through and scan through and work out what it's trying to say and the takeaway point, if you can extract that and paraphrase it into your words, you can do that as quickly as you can. I'd say this, that basically this journal article is. Don't be afraid to kind of be instrumental in your reading. Yeah, so if you're completely new to something, this is definitely more generic, but if you're in a new situation, there are some useful questions that can help you to be critical, because they ask questions of what it is you're evaluating. And when you answer those questions, it's really useful. So in this case, these are the biggest question you can ask. And if you answer it, in answering the question, all your critique comes out. So is the thing you're looking at effective or ineffective? So for you, you're looking at PR practices that are effective or ineffective. And funnily enough, as I said before, that there's this balance here where you would have to say that it's effective in terms of being ethical, but it's less effective in protecting the company. And you'll get to the point where you'll say, this is about as unethical as you can get and still protect the company. After this, you've gone too far. But, you know, talking about each individual thing and talk about why it's effective for the company and why it's ineffective for ethics, or it's ethically ineffective, then those are the two sides of any kind of strategy. Because any strategy you talk about will be either very ethical but damaging to the company, or it'll be good for the company and damaging in terms of ethics. Then you can point those out and say this is where it would be. So all of those examples, you can say it's effective. Yeah, inexpensive, you know, the way that you try and employ PR, I am sure has, when people employ a PR company, they'll say, can you do something for us? And they'll say, we can do a lot for you, but it's going to cost you. And the company might go, I've not got that much money. Well, this is what we can do for you for the budget you have. So you might say you have really good media things, but you might be able to specify that these are particularly expensive and that it's really only big corporations that might be able to afford them. And I think that's a viable critique, and it's another area. The expense of anything you're doing is an area that you could think about because it's useful to understand. Yeah, dangerous or safe. Yeah, dangerous or safe. If you applied that here, are you in any legal jeopardy when you do some of the PR you do? If you really protect the company and the ethics go out the door, is there a point where it's not an ethical thing, but it's actually a legal thing? So that the danger is maybe a legal danger for you, a legal danger for the company. Or if you're too honest, is there a legal jeopardy for the company because you're incriminating them? Because you're being too honest, you're actually saying, what you want to see what they're doing in the back there? Oh, aye, they're doing this and that, and the next thing, that's shocking. And they say, oh, well, we're just going to contact the police. Oh, I never said that. Just forget I said that. So there are things about the actions you take may have some danger or jeopardy for them. Popular or unpopular, that's a good, yeah. Is there a way of protecting a company, or is there a way of PRing a company that is more popular than others? So you can say this is a common popular with PR people or popular with companies. You can say this is a well-trodden, it's a safe, it's an assured, it's a popular method. That's a valid thing to bring in, I think. And then you can look for the potential issues or challenges that come out of anything. So you can look at a PR strategy and say, what does it solve? Does it solve problems? What does it solve? Or does it create problems? You know, does it solve the problem of getting folk off the bank of the company for now, but does it create problems for later on when the truth comes out? You know, are you setting problems for the future? Are you solving things now? So that's a useful thing. And of course, I think for me, the who benefits is the divide between the consumer and the business. So consumers have rights, consumers do have rights, but consumers should be protected. And transparency, a company transparency benefits. The more transparency, the more I think it benefits consumers, right? The more you're not transparent, the more it benefits the company because people don't know what's happening. So who benefits? When you pick a strategy, are you siding more with, this is more for disclosure, this is more about, technically it's going to be about transparency, I suppose. You know, how much do you give away? How much do you talk about? And how do you say the things that you give away? And where does it work best? Yeah, what works for a big company? What works for a small company? What works for a big issue? You know, it might be easier to do PR for a small company because nobody knows who they are, or it's a local issue, so you'll say, for a big corporation, we've got to do big because it's everywhere. For a small local issue, it might be something you can actually handle much easier and much better because there's less fallout. There's less people are interested. Okay, but these, you see how they open the door, and just by asking that and then trying to answer it, and that particular thing can be helpful. Yeah, apparently you can be critical about people or things. That's all that slide says. So you can, you know, you can critique concept, series, process, phenomenon things, or, you know, what a person did, a professional, an academic, or a politician. You can critique them as people have critiqued Liz Truss, for example, or Suella Braverman. So where do you get your information from? This doesn't quite fit with the question, but I'm giving you examples of the importance of, if you wanted to say statements about how important, there are four things that you can bring into the essay. And definitely these four you should feature. So the first one is you particularly stick with academics. So here one, can 2021 asserts that PR is important for effective organizational communication. So there's a thing. When you say why is it important, when you talk about the basics before you kick off, then that's important. That's one of the benefits of PR is you need it for effective. It gives you effective communication, right? But other than academics, you can use the opinion of people that know what they're talking about. That's called authority. When people have authority, they know what they're talking about. So the BBC can only really get on people who know what they're talking about for their news articles. And you actually see people who are on the television or something, and the person asks them a question and they say, well, I'm not a specialist in that area, I can't comment on it. So they stick with, so if the person's an expert, and you would argue that maybe a company CEO, if they talk about PR, they're talking about it from an experienced point of view. So that gives them a validity, which for my mind, you can sometimes use in your report. So sometimes you can use the opinion of people. It might be an interview, it might be a blog by a CEO or something, or an interview, a newspaper article. But they would say, and you could read that and you could say, many CEOs say PR is an essential business strategy. So they're talking about it practically. Can is talking about it theoretically. But you can also talk about it logically. So you could add something and you could work something out, and you could kind of say, well, based on this, I'm going to suggest this because it makes sense. The important thing about logic, which is your logic and what you've written, is, for example, here it says, therefore, being a graduate with PR experience may be an advantage in the job market. It depends on the job market, but I think that's valid to say that if PR in a company is theoretically an important thing and practically an important thing, if you're looking for a job and you also mention, apart from all the other things I've got an understanding of how PR works, then in my mind, it's got to be a useful addition because it's been shown to be important. So if you have that knowledge, there's actions that you take, that experience can inform what you do. And in terms of PR, you can improve how you decide to do things. And then you've got examples. And the final one, there's the example. It's not actually a true example, but so you might get something that says Nike has invested $30 million in internal PR in 2020. And to me, PR training, I think it may be supposed to say PR training, internal PR. So yeah, not external PR, internal PR. So they've spent money training their own people about PR because they know it's so important. So that's a kind of an example you could use. Okay, so all four of these things can make an appearance in your work to prove the point that you're making. Okay, so just understand that, although mainly it's going to be academics, there will be some logic, opinion, maybe occasionally some logic as well. And the examples, they've asked for examples. And the examples are the way you demonstrate whether it works or not. So I'd expect quite a few examples if you can find them. Just that this is a bunch of stuff you don't do. Don't be too general. Try and stick to the question is always specific. So try not to be too general about it. I find commonly people say, this will happen, this happens, this doesn't happen, which is not true. That's absolutes. If you said this often happens, or this is a regular occurrence, that's fine. If you say the majority of times, if you say this is very common, that's fine. But you say this always happens, or this happens without any, kind of caution, as we call it, then that's not good. Don't be afraid to make intelligent suggestions or hypotheses. That's exactly what I'm talking about there, is that input of logic. That wouldn't need a reference because you're basing it on that, and it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense to say, well, if I've got PR experience plus everything else that the job requires, I've got an advantage. And then, because they'll be like, well, the guy knows PR, so hopefully they'll not do something that will put us in it. I don't know. Also, once you start to express your side and you start to understand the way it's going or where you could strike the balance, don't be afraid to say that. So don't be afraid at the end of some paragraphs to start saying things in your own words, to say, all of this evidence supports that the place to strike the balance is by doing some of this and not so much of that, or some of this and some of that, or some of this and some of that. But try and say, I've kind of worked out for myself what I think this essay is telling me, and write it in. And that's just said, it's statements like, this evidence suggests that, this and that, and the next, and this evidence. So you're just summarizing what you've written. But it allows you to say, you can say it's really difficult, or it's difficult to say where you put it, or you can say there is a definite line, and or this is a balance you're trying to strike. This is where you do it. You have this much ethics and this much transparency. Conclusions are usually plural. Well, I've absolutely said that before, which is just that, if you're being positively ethical, you're being negative on the company, and if you're being positive for the company, you're being negative one, and you would tend to talk in it in those terms. And if you come across something you disagree with, don't ignore it. Bring it in. It doesn't. If you've tried to build up and then suddenly there's something there that doesn't, then just don't look at that. Just bring it in, use it. It will be rewarded. When you're when you write a claim, and I put this is a claim here. It comes in three parts. You've got the claim, the reason why you can claim that, and how it happens. So I'm just briefly going to talk about this. Smartphones save lives. That's the claim. Why is it they save lives? Because they allow direct communication and they identify your location. That's the why. But then you have to say, how does that happen? And that happens. This means you can contact people for help and they can find out where you are if you are lost, allowing you to be found. And then you can give examples of where people are lost, and then people come along and save them because they phone them up and say, I'm lost. Use 3 words, and you'll find me. The 3 words are biscuit, rabbit, headlight, or whatever, right? And that's the 3, actually 4, if you count the example. These are because I'm saying this because what I find is sometimes they'll give the claim and they'll give the reason why, but they won't explain how. So you're not completely showing all your understanding. Or they'll claim what it is and they'll say how it happens, but they don't explain why it works. So you've got to have all 3 elements when you're making a claim. I think that's us.